They cheered when he died. They cheered when he died. That's not a metaphor. When Louis XV, King of France, Louis the Beloved, finally dropped dead, Paris exploded in applause. No mourning, no silence, just relief. Like someone had finally taken out the trash. Because by the time his rotting corpse was wheeled down the halls of Versailles, the man on that throne wasn't a king anymore. He was a symbol of everything the French had come to hate. A body bloated with hypocrisy, stitched together with mistresses, failure, and the kind of royal arrogance that smelled worse than his actual death. And trust me, that death stank. Flesh peeling off, pus oozing through royal silk. Even his most devoted servants had to hold back gagging as they fled his chambers one by one. But this story doesn't start with a dying king. No, it starts with a boy on a throne, a nation full of hope, and a crown that would eventually crush him from the inside out. You ready? Because this is not just the story of a king. It's the slow, festering collapse of a regime, one stinking corpse at a time. A throne built on prayers. What happens when a 5-year-old inherits a kingdom burning at both ends? Answer: you don't get a king. You get a symbol, and symbols decay faster than men. He was 5 years old when they gave him the crown. Not a metaphor, literally 5. Louis XIV had just died, the longest reigning monarch in European history, and his great-grandson, the last surviving male heir of the Bourbon line, was the only royal left standing. France was broke. The Sun King had burned the empire into debt, drought, and disillusionment, but people still clung to the fantasy. They saw Louis XV, small, pale, barely able to speak, and whispered, "Maybe this one will be different." The regency followed. For 8 years, power was held by Philippe II, Duke of Orleans, while Louis grew up inside Versailles, a child in a palace, a symbol wrapped in brocade. And under Orleans, France briefly exhaled. Economy picked up, the press flowered. Libertinism danced through salons and court beds alike. But Louis, he watched, quiet, polite, malleable. His tutors praised his intelligence. Historians agree he was no fool. But they also say this: he hated making decisions, hated confrontation. Even early on, he showed signs of withdrawing inward, letting others guide his steps while he played the part of Louis the Beloved. Yes, that's the nickname. Louis le Bien-Aimé, given to him in his 20s after surviving a major illness. And the irony, he didn't even enjoy the popularity. He found it exhausting. Behind the nickname, behind the portraits and courtly dances, Louis was already detaching. From politics, from responsibility, from the people cheering his name, he preferred hunting, silence, private chambers. While France begged for direction, their king grew increasingly absent. By 1730s, he ruled in name. But the court ruled in practice. What began as a promising reign was quietly slipping into inertia. And that's the tragedy. Louis XV didn't destroy France with fire. He did it with neglect. And soon the world outside Versailles would feel it, because a kingdom doesn't rot all at once. It starts where no one looks, at the top. Louis XV didn't destroy France with fire. He did it with neglect. And the rot, it always starts slow. If Louis XV was France's scented ghost king, decaying in silence while nobles played dress-up, then his Chinese counterpart during the same era, Emperor Qianlong, was the opposite. All fireworks, expansion, and poetry, while rot quietly spread under his gilded throne too, one ruled by absence, the other by excess. But both built empires that would soon choke on their own illusions. The angel turns, T.O. wax. He survived illness, was blessed by priests, adored by poets. And yet the only thing that truly stuck to Louis XV was perfume. Everything else melted off. By the 1740s, Louis was no longer a boy. He was a man, a king, and at least on paper, an absolute monarch of one of the greatest empires in Europe. But something was off. He looked the part. He smiled the smile. He sat on the throne with that same cold majesty inherited from his great-grandfather. But when it came time to rule, Louis blinked, hesitated, and let others decide. France needed a spine. What they got was a silhouette. He entered the War of the Austrian Succession in 1740 with no clear strategy, no defined national interest, and no coherent vision. It was politics by instinct, or worse, by boredom. Tens of thousands of men died. Taxes went up, debt piled higher, and when the smoke cleared in 1748, after the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, France had gained nothing. No land, no power, just grave and receipts. And yet, instead of reflection, Versailles celebrated. Feasts, fireworks, dancing, as if denial could fix a dying empire. Louis XV returned from battle as a hero, but the people were watching more closely now. The cracks were showing. He began pulling away from public life, retreating into his chambers, his hunts, and soon his lovers. Because if you can't win on the battlefield, why not win in bed? And here she comes, Madame de Pompadour, a commoner, a woman of wit, charm, and obsession with power. She didn't just warm his bed, she took over his mind. From art patronage to diplomatic appointments, Pompadour became a shadow queen, pulling the strings while France bled outside the gates. Ministers were replaced not by merit, but by who she liked. Reforms were stalled. Advisors feared her. And Louis, he just smiled, sipped wine, and let her run the show. The man once seen as heaven's gift had become Versailles hostage. Caged not by enemies, but by comfort. But comfort doesn't last, because just around the corner was a war he couldn't sleep through. And this time, France would pay in blood and land. Fire without victory. Some kings go to war and return with glory. Louis went to war and came back with nothing but receipts and a shrunken map. It was called the 7 Years' War, but for France. It was a lifetime of humiliation compressed into 7 bleeding chapters. It started in 1756. Louis XV, still soft, still elusive, was dragged into a conflict that spanned 5 continents, from the jungles of India to the frozen rivers of Canada. France faced Britain and Prussia. The stakes, global empire. But Louis wasn't interested in strategy. He didn't read dispatches. He barely showed up. He let his ministers play general while he lounged behind brocade curtains, hunting deer and whispering to mistresses. Meanwhile, in the real world, French ships burned in the Atlantic. Quebec fell to the British. India slipped from France's grasp like a dying jewel. Louisiana was lost. And by the time the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763, France had effectively surrendered its global empire, while Britain strutted away fat with colonies and gold. The cost, staggering. France's navy shattered, finances wrecked, colonial ambitions dead. And Louis, he just sighed, like he misplaced a glove. This wasn't just military defeat, it was psychological castration. France no longer ruled the seas. Louis XV no longer ruled the hearts. The people saw through the silks now. The king who once symbolized hope had become a symbol of impotence, a man who couldn't hold land, love, or loyalty. Whispers grew louder. Does he even care? Pamphlets mocked him. Cartoons depicted him in bed while soldiers died abroad. And in cafes and salons, the new kings of the Enlightenment, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, began deconstructing monarchy itself. The war may have ended, but something far more dangerous had begun, an intellectual revolution. But Louis XV didn't fight that one either. He did what he always did, retreated. Deeper into Versailles, deeper into denial. And in the shadows of the Hall of Mirrors, a new kind of rot began to bloom. Moral. The Velvet Plague. Some kings fall to swords, others to revolts. Louis XV, he was eaten alive by whispers, perfume, and thighs wrapped in lace. And by the time the country noticed, the rot already smelled like roses. Let's be clear. Versailles was never about governance. It was a theatre, a stage dressed in gold leaf and powdered wigs designed to distract a kingdom from its own bleeding feet. And at the center of it all, Louis XV, once called the Beloved. Now just a hollow actor in a silk costume, mouthing the words of others while puppets pulled his hands. After the 7 years, war gutted France's military pride and colonial empire, Louis didn't regroup, he retreated. Not to strategy, not to reform, to his bedchambers. This is where real power began shifting from ministries to mistresses, and none cast a longer shadow than Madame de Pompadour. She was clever, cultured, calculating. She patronized philosophers, promoted artists, commissioned great architecture. But above all, she learned how to govern the king. She became his consigliere in petticoats, appointing officials, manipulating diplomacy, silencing critics. And Louis, he let her. He needed her. She made him feel intelligent, while she steered an empire off a cliff with a smile and a curtsy. But even Pompadour couldn't hold him forever. By the time her health declined, Louis's appetites turned darker. That's when he built Parc aux Cerfs, the Park of the Stags. What was it? Not a hunting lodge. No, this was a royal brothel, hidden behind manicured hedges. A place where young girls, some barely 14, were kept in isolation, dressed, trained, and summoned at will. They came from poor families, given money, promises, silence, and when their time ended, they vanished into the shadows of history, nameless. Uteruses first. It wasn't just vice. It was state-sponsored exploitation, wrapped in satin and called courtly pleasure. Even the nobles began whispering. Versailles was turning from a palace to a bordello. And when Pompadour died, he didn't reform. He replaced her with someone even less palatable to the elites, Madame du Barry, a former sex worker, a woman from the gutters of society. Elevated to the king's inner circle, and horrifyingly to the court, treated as royalty. Du Barry didn't pretend to be wise. She didn't play politics. She laughed loudly, flaunted her jewels, mocked the church, and devoured public funds. And Louis, he adored her. While peasants ate bark and nobles bled dry paying debts from failed wars, Louis poured fortunes into perfumed estates, custom beds, and golden toilets. And for the first time, the public's disgust wasn't silent. Pamphlets depicted the king as a goat being milked by prostitutes. Streets echoed with songs mocking his lust. Enlightenment thinkers tore apart the myth of divine right and replaced it with logic, rage, and revolution. The monarchy had lost its mask. Louis XV wasn't just ineffective, he was now embarrassing. But the final act wasn't written in velvet. It was written in blood, boils, and the stench of decay. Because when death finally came for Louis XV, he died like his kingdom, rotting from the inside, and abandoned by those who once cheered his name. The corpse still breathes. Some kings die with trumpets. Louis died with flies. And when they opened the curtains, even death seemed embarrassed to show up. May 1774. Louis XV lay in bed, rotting, while still alive. It started small. A fever, rash, some swelling. His physicians, fumbling as always in the 18th century, shrugged and called it fatigue. But the truth moved faster than their diagnoses. It was smallpox, and not the discreet, polite kind. Louis's body erupted, blisters the size of coins, skin blackening, pus oozing through silk sheets. The courtiers stopped bowing and started fleeing. The smell, so bad, entire wings of Versailles were abandoned. He, the king, the beloved, was now a leaking corpse in a golden bed. And Madame du Barry, gone, banished the moment his pulse weakened. They shoved her into a carriage and dumped her miles away like spoiled meat. The king was dying, and Versailles didn't want a whore in the background of the funeral. By day 4, his body was unrecognizable. His nose collapsed, his eyes sunken, crusted over. The rot had seeped into his organs, his breath a mixture of vinegar and vinegar's shame. Even his children refused to approach. Servants cried when they were forced to touch him. Priests whispered last rites through handkerchiefs. The man who once commanded an empire had become an infection in a crown. No royal rituals, no elegant farewell, just sheets soaked in fluid and a death no one wanted to remember. And yet, even in this pitiful decay, he lingered. For days, France watched and waited, not with sorrow, but with impatience. People in Paris literally cheered when they heard the news. "The king is dead" became a punchline, not a mourning cry. He had once been Louis the Beloved. Now, he was just Louis the Burden. But death wasn't the end, because even the corpse of a failed king can curse the next one, and his grandson, Louis XVI, would inherit more than a crown. He would inherit a time bomb. The legacy of rot. The king is dead, but what if the real infection stayed alive? Louis XV was buried. Quick, quiet, no pomp, no mourning. Just a box of pus sealed inlaid and thrown into the vaults of Saint Denis. His corpse didn't get the royal send-off. His memory didn't get forgiveness. But his debt, oh, that lived on. He left France not a crown, but a powder keg. Let's tally it. A crushed military. A broken colonial empire. A bankrupt treasury. A bloated aristocracy. And a people learning how to read and how to riot. His wars had emptied the coffers. His court had spent like it was Judgment Day. His taxes hit the poor but not the rich. His laws bent to bishops, not to reason. And when anyone spoke up, writers, thinkers, dreamers, he censored, exiled, or jailed them. But guess what? It didn't work. Because Voltaire kept writing. Diderot kept printing. Rouser kept planting the seeds. Ideas began to spread, not through sermons, but through salons, pamphlets, and dirty jokes told in back-alley wine bars. Ideas that said maybe kings weren't chosen by God. Maybe they were just men in wigs, hoarding bread while babies starved. Louis XV didn't just break the monarchy. He made the people stop fearing it. The spell was broken. If a king could rot like any peasant, then maybe kings weren't sacred after all. And that's what Louis XVI walked into. A crown with no magic, a court with no credit, a kingdom ready to explode. All that was left was the spark. And when it came, it wouldn't just burn the palace. It would guillotine the entire idea of royalty. The symbol of a dying world. Some deaths end eras. His became the monument to one. Louis XV's corpse didn't rest. Not really. It was sealed, inlaid, yes. But it lived on, not in marble statues or royal prayers, but in satire, disgust, and nightmares. His death wasn't mourned. It was studied, dissected, used like a warning label on a bottle of expired power. Even the Enlightenment thinkers, who spent their careers dismantling monarchy, couldn't have scripted a better final scene. A king swollen with disease, abandoned by lovers, servants, and legacy, rotting behind Versailles, gold-coated curtains, while the people outside lit torches, not for vigil, but for revolt. He became a symbol, not of majesty, not of greatness, but of decay so foul it collapsed the very illusion of divine rule. And when his grandson Louis XVI stepped up, there was nothing divine left. Only debt, distrust, and a crowd learning how to spell guillotine. Louis XV wasn't just a failure, he was a prophecy. Proof that rot, when left long enough, doesn't just smell, it spreads. It poisons every corridor it touched, until even gold smells like shit. And here's the real horror, my friend. So, you watched a king rot in his own filth. You saw his crown melt under the weight of his own cowardice. You saw a kingdom sink while its ruler fumbled with lace and perfume. Disgusted. Good. But here's the part that should make your stomach churn harder. Louis XV didn't live in isolation. He lived in applause, in silence, in a system too comfortable to question him, and too slow to stop him. Now ask yourself, How many Louis XVs are alive today? How many thrones are built on public amnesia, luxury, and bullshit? Because the worst kind of rot isn't historical. It's ongoing. It's in boardrooms, in parliaments, in comment sections, in you. So don't just watch this, scream into it. Drop your thoughts below. Whether you're furious, fascinated, or just freaked the hell out. And if you're the kind of person who thinks history isn't just dates and dead men, hit subscribe, because we've got more filth to unearth. Next episode's already sharpening the blade. See you in the shadows.